Greetings again. I'm Casey Green. We're a little bit ahead of schedule this afternoon. Joining me right now, coming into the window on your screens, is Michael King. Michael is a vice president, and he is the general manager of IBM Global's education industry. Mike, thanks very much for joining us.
No, thanks for inviting me. Nice to be here, Casey.
So that you've been, we're at the, again, as a reminder to our audience, this is the ASU GSV Innovation Summit. We were talking earlier, you've been to most of these, from what was just a couple of hundred people at a hotel, a nice hotel, admittedly, in Phoenix. Yeah. It moved this year to accommodate a much larger group. There's 3,500 people here plus in San Diego. Why is this conference important? What, not necessarily to IBM, obviously, you're here and others are here. Why is this important to education as you think about the history of the conference, conversations and activities here, and what happens here and afterwards?
Well, I think that we're at a major inflection point in general across all industries, and education, one of the last industries to really digitize and begin to use technology in ways to get better outcomes in the learning process. I think we've used technology in back office administration for years, but we're beginning to see technology really have impact on outcomes, to be able to change the trajectory of a student's life in a variety of ways. And so I think there's been a real influx of investment. If you look at education as an industry, it's 5% of GDP globally. In some states, it constitutes a third of the budget that governors and state legislatures manage. And so around the globe, it's absolutely important that we do as much as we can to ensure every individual succeeds. So I think we're seeing more investment happening. It's an opportunity to do innovation, to try things, to see what works, what doesn't, what really has an impact with instructors and students around the globe. So it's kind of exciting to see this much energy and passion being unleashed around the topic.
These conversations are not intended to be infomercials, but you've been with IBM for a long time. Many of us who've been in education for a long time, in computer labs and in classrooms, for a long time there was an IBM presence there, particularly in the wake of the PC. That landscape has changed. And yet IBM is, in some ways, equally ubiquitous, even if the logo is not as present. Talk about some of the changes about IBM's presence in education of late.
Well, I think we're still present in the industry where you no longer have that device or that presence right in front of the end user like we used to have with ThinkPads. But we're doing a lot in terms of managing data and doing the analytics work at the back end. We provide a lot of services to institutions to help them figure out how to navigate through these digital transformations, and particularly how to make effective use of data within their institutions to get better outcomes. And so we're doing a lot in that.
Let's talk about some of the big data applications in education. Again, in terms of IBM's activities, in terms of supporting K-12, higher ed, customization, individualized learning, the work that you do with other firms who tap IBM's technology in terms of educational resources and learning experiences and outcomes in both K-12 and higher ed.
Well, I think that's an area we see as a tremendous opportunity for us going forward. Our CEO talks a lot about the cognitive era, and we're kind of moving into this new era of programming where you have machine learning that is doing a lot with these very large data sets and big data, if you will. And how can we apply that in education? And we think about that in really three areas. One, how can you improve classroom and the classroom outcomes? How do you do that as a campus and K-12 campus, higher education institution, improving that student engagement, that student experience throughout the life cycle, and using data to improve that, and ultimately then career alignment. How can we use these sort of data and analytics tools to get better alignment to careers? And so there's a lot of opportunity in all of those dimensions to do stuff. So we're working with partners and clients on that.
It seems to me, though, that if you will, the metaphor of the last mile or the last 400 yards is not about the analytics. Once we get better with the tools and the technology and changing the culture, one of not penalizing folks, but using the data as a way of saying, how can we do better for the individual student in terms of the experiences in schools and colleges, but the training for folks as well. We talk about the technology, we talk about the tools, we talk about transparency. Training is still an important part of it. That's not the data itself, but what we hand to people so they understand how to use it effectively.
I think I'd say there's two things, and also the user experience with how do you present these tools as another piece of this. So I think there's an important aspect to how do we train a generation of instructors and others on how effectively to use data in the classroom. And
that's typically not the training that college faculty and K-12 teachers get other than giving tests.
no, and I think one of the things that we've learned in K-12 in education is, data can also be seen as a negative.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, we have to ensure that we're leading with the positive benefits of these kinds of new data systems and analytics, and how does that really contribute to improved outcomes for the student, support for the instructor, and not necessarily lead with the more negative aspects of this. And the other piece I talk about experience, IBM has now acquired a large number of interactive experience companies. We're the largest digital marketing agency now on the planet, because a lot of what we're seeing is that expectations are set by consumer applications, what people are able to get from the public consumer cloud. So it challenges not just education institutions, but every enterprise to make sure they're building these very compelling user experiences that bring people in, and the data and the analytics, all that seems to be kind of hidden behind that experience.
Yeah, I think that's, particularly in universities, to me, that's very striking. At one point, universities used to lead on these experiences. If you think back in terms of the emergence of the IBM PC and later the web, a decade later, these were in some ways almost rite of passage experiences. You went to the university. Many of us of middle age, gray or thinning hair, often got our first email accounts when we went to college. At this point today, students arrive. That's how all the transaction is done, whether you're an 18-year-old going off to college, if you're fortunate to be a full-time undergraduate living on campus, if you're a part-time student in a community college, if you're somebody going back. So some of those experiences have already been done, but a lot of the expectation has been driven by the consumer side. I can do this because of the consumer experience. Why can't they do that? And I think that's, the other part of that relates to the whole issue of data. My bank and my credit card company knows a lot more about me than perhaps my college or university does, and perhaps makes better use of that data than does my school or my college or university.
No, absolutely. And I think a couple of aspects of that. One is, historically, institutions have been very decentralized, and so you find I've had it characterized as data dungeons, not just data silos. And so if you really want to deliver a better digital student experience, first thing you have to do is make sure you can have the data from the institution and use that and leverage that in a new digital experience. And then how effectively can you build that experience?
Yeah, so actually one of the advantages of the technology we're using, Shindig, is it allows for video interaction with people in the audience. We have a question from David, so we're going to bring this up. David's going to be asked the question of you directly.
Sure.
All right, let's bring up David's question, please.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, David.
I have a quick question for you. It's interesting when you think
David,
through.
Who are you?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm David Talkman. I'm actually an employee over at Shindig that's powering this crazy online interactivity. But I got kind of into the subject matter, and I have a question for Michael. So when you talk about big data and you talk about data sets and collection of data and use of it to make education a better thing for the masses, I totally get it. I also like the fact that data is being collected about me to make my Pandora a better experience. But how does that jibe against the sort of privacy concerns and what we're hearing from Washington about sort of Big Brother watching us and our behaviors to make it easier for them to sell things to us, to know what our behaviors are in terms of commerce? And do any of those concerns cut against what you're trying to do with big data?
Absolutely.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
It's a great question. I gave a commencement address in Europe this past spring.
Hey, guys.
And thanks. That was really the topic. And I think that how we begin to define digital citizenship in the future is one of the important aspects of this. I think education is a great platform or an industry in which we can start to define these definitions of digital citizenship. From our point of view, we're not, as a company, we're not in the business of monetizing data. And so we really see ourselves as an IT service provider. And I think ultimately, when it comes to personal data, student data, our vision is that needs to be curated properly and secured. Ultimately, the end users need to have, and I mean students need to have greater understanding of what's there and greater control of that data. There's a lot of kind of general population data, other kinds of data that can be brought to bear to help inform or personalize an experience for a student and get better outcomes. But when it comes to the student's personal data, we think that's stuff that the institution should curate, and that ultimately the learner needs to have some ability to have insight and some control of that from a policy perspective.
Great. Mike, I want to shift a little bit. There's been a lot of conversation in higher ed about the cloud as a resource for leveraging technology, as a resource potentially to reduce some of the costs. Talk with us a little bit about IBM's role in that, because you're not necessarily, you're providing some software, but the kind of operational software colleges and universities like student record systems, that's not your business with the cloud. You're providing research capacity and you're providing infrastructure. Is that right?
Well, I think our view of cloud is ultimately that the industry. This is where the industry is headed. There are tremendous cost savings potential for a lot of institutions. We now see we in fact have clients that are effectively eliminating their data centers and moving them to us. We're really not focused as a company on necessarily being the largest consumer-based platform cloud company at very low cost, low margin, commodity type businesses. There are other people that can do that very well. We're trying to find areas where we can add a lot more value to that cloud. A lot of institutions are going to want to have what we call a hybrid cloud, or have more of their data on site, right, on their premises, and control that. How do they effectively integrate that to other cloud services, public cloud services? We're finding institutions that as they take their legacy systems and want to move their data centers off campus and shut those down, we can bring those onto our cloud infrastructure because they're somewhat unique, but they get some of the cost advantages of being on the cloud. And so there, it is I think a transition that's going to happen that 5-10 years from now we can anticipate a lot of systems and infrastructure being on the cloud. It's going to be a mix of services on cloud, some on-prem, or maybe coming out of our unique cloud infrastructure.
A couple of claims that I hear about cloud, and some of the concerns that I hear from campus CIOs. And some of this is in conversation. Some of this shows up in the data from campus computing, for example. Let's start with the issue of security. Whether it's true or not, I hear lots of IT officers at colleges and universities, I don't know what the corporate experience is, really concerned about the security of data with a cloud provider. Since it's, where will my data be? It's sort of like, where's my teenager after 11 o'clock at night if I can't find that? Who has that data? What's the security? Again, it may not be founded in experience, but large numbers of the IT officers that participate in my annual survey feel that they can do as good or better providing IT security on their own campuses. Well, we know there's lots of stories about open offices, passwords under blotters, stuff, Post-it notes that are taped every place else, than the security that they can get from cloud providers in general. I'm not talking about IBM specifically, but just the whole issue of IT security on the cloud. How secure is the cloud?
I think it depends on the provider and on the environment, but I think our goal is that you get as good or better security in the cloud as what you can deliver yourselves. I mean, IBM works across multiple industry domains. We operate a lot, financial systems, health systems, and all that is required to be very secure. If you look at healthcare records as an example. Yeah. And so we have a lot of experience doing that, and I would argue that we can probably do it better than a lot of certainly smaller institutions without the depth of IT staff.
The second claim I hear about the cloud, expectation. This one goes back to the early days of computers in general, is that we're going to save money with technology. You talk with a lot of college presidents who have come of age personally and professionally in their own research and experience going into administrative roles. There's a feeling in higher education it's absolutely necessary, but we're not aware that we're necessarily saving money. Good case studies about colleges and universities that have actually saved money going to the cloud, or are we just too early in the deployment curve to actually have that well documented?
Well, I think...
And where are the savings when they occur? Yeah, we're going to get rid of some of the iron. It's going to be someplace else. We don't have to have the geography of taking up space. But how will that be? Will that potentially be offset by other kinds of costs?
Well, it's an interesting question. I guess my perspective is ultimately we don't. If people think that technology is about, you can save money, absolutely. But what I think frustrates a lot of executives is they find their budget necessarily isn't going down in technology. And that's because that we continue to see the evolution of new technologies, new abilities to create a new business case, to add new value, to say create a better student experience, to get better learning outcomes. And so I do think that we're saving dollars in terms of a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the operational costs that used to go with maybe back office administrative systems. But we're really seeing a redeployment of some of those dollars and maybe an increase in dollars allocated to technology going into these things that really do touch the student experience and drive learning outcomes and career outcomes for students.
So what are some examples? Pretty easy to understand how the cloud works on the administrative side. My information systems, my management systems, finance, student information, other stuff, that moves to the cloud. But on the learning experience for students, what are some really good examples of how the cloud plays in that learning experience?
Well, to some extent, I think that it's not so much that cloud changes that experience.
Well, the infrastructure that it provides.
Cloud is a way to essentially deploy an infrastructure in a more scalable and robust way, and more effectively having to invest a lot up front in technology and operate it yourself. I think the value for that is it allows institutions to shift their focus to these things like the student outcome, the student experience. So examples, we've done a lot of work at Gwinnett County Schools. They've employed some cloud services. We implemented a learning management system for them that's deployed on the cloud. They don't have to operate in their own data center. We're building a data platform to improve their student experience and outcomes, kind of bringing that together in a transformative experience for the students, using data in the classroom for teachers so they can effectively manage and personalize instruction for those students across the board. We're doing work at EM Lyon Business School in France, very similar project, really transforming that student experience. A lot of it delivered on the as cloud services, but I see a lot of institutions wanting to take these piece parts and begin to put them together in a way that delivers that unique client experience or student experience unique to their institution.
IBM's been doing some really interesting and it's also entertaining commercials with Watson.
Right.
I'm thinking about the Bob Dylan commercial, a couple of others. Where does Watson play in terms of K-12? Is there a Watson play at K-12?
Well, yeah.
And this is a question that actually came from the audience.
Sure, absolutely. So Watson is our first platform in this area of cognitive computing, leveraging a set of machine learning where instead of programming the computer, the system itself learns over time. And I described it kind of three areas where we see Watson having an impact. One is in the classroom.
Right.
We're doing work in K-12 today where we're using the Watson technologies to understand the learning resources available within a school district, to understand the student themselves, and to help teachers group students into cohorts and build unique learning pathways for those students. We're exploring in higher education, how do you change the student engagement? How can we do student advising, do things across the campus that can help keep a student on track, get students more engaged into the campus and create interventions where we need it. And I think the one that I'm kind of ultimately excited about is around careers, and how can we use Watson, big data sets, and both an in-depth knowledge of the student to help develop a learning pathway of help a student ultimately create an aspiration and give them a pathway on how they get to a certain career.
Yeah. I want to go global. We live in a global economy. Your title is you are global education industry. How is the U.S. ed market, K-12 and higher ed, different from other areas, other geographies?
Well, I think that the United States clearly is one of the largest markets. There's a lot of innovation happening in technology here. I see a lot of similarities. Really, if you've been around the globe as many times as I have, you start to see the similarities and common themes. Everyone's got a different starting point. The current challenges that they're facing, whether it's in the Middle East or it's in Latin America, people taking different approaches to trying to address some of those challenges. But I think they've ultimately all have the same vision. And when you can talk about how do we give every student, every learner, really a quality education, that we shift from this model of education as a scarce resource, and our most prestigious institutions are grading themselves on how many people they don't accept, but to a model where we can deliver quality at scale. Everyone knows that's going to require technology, and we want to be able to do that at an individual level, help them through the classroom, help them get to jobs that are meaningful and give them what they want in life. And I think everybody's got the same goal. People are just starting from different points to get there.
I had a graduate, I said this in one of the other interviews, but I think it's relevant here. You've been to this conference as it's evolved from a couple of hundred people to 3,500. I had a prof in a public policy class in graduate school years ago, walks in, opening moments of the first day says, implementation is the movement of cup to lip. We could also potentially say that about innovation. Are there cup to lip moments that you have seen as you think about this conference that you can, whether it's for IBM or just in other contexts, to say, that happened here and we can see this now?
Well, I think what I see happening at this conference are the sort of connections that are allowing things to, great ideas. We fail fast.
Yeah.
And this is an industry that as you get more, more activity, more excitement, more funding, people are trying things, and that's absolutely what we've got to do. Digitizing knowledge, the knowledge industry, if you will, is probably the most difficult thing we've tried to do in the technology space. So what I see is a lot of great ideas being exchanged, a lot of ideas that fail fast, and a lot of ideas that gain persistence, and the connections being made across some of these ideas to say, hey, if you put A and B together, you get C. And so I think it's been a very healthy dialogue, a healthy community to begin to come together to focus on all these issues.
Great. Michael King from IBM, thanks very much for joining us for this conversation today from the ASU GSV Innovation Summit.
Thanks, Casey.
Thanks. We will be right back with our next interview. We'll be talking with Richard Carenza, who is the superintendent of the San Francisco Unified School District. We'll be right back in a moment as we bring in the next person. Stay with us.